Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming a distinguished guest who is at the forefront of innovation, attracting venture capital, and unlocking the potential of space tech startups and entrepreneurs in Africa. Mr. Davis Cook is the CEO of the renowned Research Institute for Innovation and Sustainability, which is in short called RIIS. David has led his team to achieve remarkable milestones and have delivered over 100 innovation interventions with organizations in Africa and the world at large. JASBN is honored to have David join us today to share his insights and experience with us. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. David Cook. If it's your first time watching JASBN interview, JASBN is Japan Africa Space Business Network with the aim to promote space startups activities in Japan and Africa. The emergence of space startups activities in Africa is an exciting and rapidly growing trend, and several African countries and organizations like yours have recognized the potential of space technology and are investing in space-related initiatives. So, can you tell us what inspired you to establish RIIS?
So I was living in the UK for a long time, and when I moved back to South Africa in 2015, I realized that there was a much sort of bigger opportunity for myself and colleagues to shift the narrative and the effect of innovation-related programs. And so using technology as a driver for economic development. And so one of the main goals for RIIS and our sister companies, which include a venture capital firm and some other companies, is all about enabling innovation across Africa and really helping to change the trajectory of innovation and technology outcomes across the continent. So that is the reason for our existence, is helping entrepreneurs, innovators, inventors to kind of create value and bring that value to the world.
That is awesome. So, based on your experience, having more than 100 startups, what role do you think space startups can play in addressing the key development challenges in Africa? And how does it align with RIIS' vision for innovation and development?
So it's a great question. I actually want to start with our view on the way that the space industry is changing.
Okay.
So everyone kind of talks about this idea of new space. But I want to contrast this importantly with where we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, 20 years ago, there would be maybe 1 or 2 satellite launches per year. And the satellites that were being built were traditionally, small or large sats, half a ton, a ton, very large, platforms that would be put up into space. And there would be very few of them made. So from a manufacturing perspective, this is very much job shop manufacturing. It's once-off, high-value, extremely precise kind of equipment. But today, where we are launching several thousand satellites a year, we've moved into much more of an industrialized production value chain for satellites. And I think this change is important because 20 years ago, the primary funders for satellite systems were governments. And of course, it was always built by the private sector.
Exactly.
You had these very large primes, like vertically integrated, producing, the James Webb Telescope or like the Hubble or whatever. Now you have this incredible value chain of hundreds of suppliers, building subsystems and so on, that are responding to private capital, putting up constellations and so on. So within that context, what we're seeing is this emergence of a real private value chain in space. And that value chain didn't exist 20 years ago.
Right.
The only way that you could create a new value chain is with entrepreneurs. If you're going to create a new economic sector, you need startups to build that sector. And so our view is that in order for us to build a space economy across Africa, we can't start from a public sector space program approach. We have to start from an entrepreneurial approach. And so all of the work that we're doing is helping to build these individual space tech startups to kind of slowly grow out the ecosystem across Africa. So with that all as a little bit of context, we've seen the sort of greatest impact mainly on the downstream sector, so applications. And there is already a lot of kind of downstream usage from telco to positioning startups. And there are a number of remote sensing Earth observation startups that we've been working with. So one of the big programs that we have been fortunate to be a part of, which is the Africa Earth Observation Challenge, has been running since 2015. This was originally sort of conceived by SANZA, the South African Space Agency. But in the recent years, we've gotten groups coming in from Rwanda, from Kenya, from Angola, space industry associations out of Tunisia, Morocco. So it's really a big Pan-African program. And that program has supported over 300 downstream startups since 2015.
Wow, that's super
awesome. They work to light. Last year, for example, the winners were a Ghanaian startup called Snoocode, who are doing some really amazing last mile logistics positioning. There's been groups out of Nigeria doing precision ag. There's been disaster management groups out of Cameroon. So this, I think, is really where, coming back to your question, I think that the largest number of startups are addressing all of these like really important societal problems that exist across the continent. Whether that's humanitarian, whether that's agriculture and food security. There's some interesting stuff we've seen around energy security. So they're really addressing some fundamental problems. On the upstream side, we are also seeing some really interesting applications here. So both Egypt and South Africa have very strong kind of subsystem components and even small sat kind of integrated facilities. So there's a great South African firm called Dragonfly that put up the first of the dedicated agriculture constellation last year. And they're building that. Egypt has just launched maybe 6 months ago an AIT facility up to about 1,000 kilos. So the upstream sector is also busy growing. And the big advantage that we see here is that as we move towards a more industrialized manufacturing value chain for space, the economic drivers are around the cost of labor, the cost of land, and the cost of capital. And all of these things are much more competitive in an African context than they are in a very expensive kind of first world context. So there's a lot of opportunities here across the entire value chain, which makes it a really exciting place to be.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was what I wanted to ask about the support and resources that are essential for nurturing and growing these space startups. And as you rightly said, I think in Africa, what I've observed is when it comes to the user segment, using the space data, like the remote sensing tools and services to, help societal activities. That one, I think Africa is doing well. For example, what Dr. Tidian and GMES Africa is doing, helping capacity development and all of that. And All Nations University, if you know, they are also into the space education and outreach. Exactly. And also they have ground station services that support university satellites. That is good.
I'd mentioned earlier this Africa Earth Observation Challenge. So this is not a thing owned by RIIS. It is a bigger non-profit organization that had been set up. that currently has some 20 or 25 partners from across the continent. It includes space agencies, it includes industry representative bodies. There are some bigger multinationals, the likes of Planet, the likes of AWS are involved. And then groups like Global Entrepreneurship Network. And so this, I think, is the right place for agencies and development-minded organizations to play a role, because it's really Pan-African. I think last year we had like 30 countries participating. And because it is this independent nonprofit entity, its only mandate is support and grow the space tech ecosystem. So yeah, I think that through the Earth Observation Challenge, there's definitely a mechanism for us to drive that. And certainly, I think that one of the other realization that I've seen many of the agencies have had across the continent is the need to build bilateral relationships beyond engineering, right? It's great that you have the technical partnership, but if you want to build the market, you need clients, you need value chain, and so it has to go beyond just the technical aspects of what is being done.
Great. That you are correct. So does RIIS already have kind of a template that can be available for space startups in Africa? Because I normally receive these kind of requests from other African people that want to enter into the space startups. And I talked to CEO of Asli, Dr. Atim, that they are in charge of the policy and strategy. So now that everybody is now trying to go into that direction to invest and all of that, if RIIS can able to kind of come out with a template, that would be easier for them to know that if they want to know how to attract venture capital investment, these are some of the steps or guidelines they should follow. So sometimes they struggle with it. So what are your points on that?
So I think that it's a really good I think it's an important aspiration for us to have. So one of the other things that I do out beyond RIIS is I'm involved in an early stage venture capital fund that does invest into startups across the continent. We are in conversations with some space tech startups, but I think that the venture capital world in Africa is still quite small and is developing in its maturity. So there are some really great venture capital firms. So my comment about maturity is not at a VC or a firm level, it's at an industry level. So to give some approximate numbers, Africa raised on the order of $3 billion last year in venture capital, which is around kind of 1% of global venture capital. So it's a very, very small market. And there are only maybe 20 or 30 kind of really meaningful VCs across the continent. So if you think about a population of 1.3 billion people, just like the number of VCs per person is very, very small.
Very small, yeah.
There's probably 20 VCs in every square mile of Silicon Valley, right? And we have 20 across the entire continent.
Yeah.
So I think that there's still a long way for the venture capital community to grow. Now, the reason that I say that is, or I kind of raise this as something that we need to address as a space community. The underlying, kind of calculus that any VC does is around the risk of its investment, right? So, they put in money into high-risk startups. Many of the VCs that operate in Africa, we think unfairly, but there is an Africa risk premium because people don't understand the operating model within Africa. So they add risk because you're in a place that they don't understand. And then if you start talking about space, this is now an additional risk layer or premium that VCs are uncomfortable with. And so, I think that if, when we have spoken to other venture capital in the region, and you kind of like, layer all these levels of risk on, they become very reluctant to even have a conversation
invest.
about
Yeah, it's true.
And I think this is the reason why, if you look at, so there's a Kenyan startup called Amini that just raised $4 million in a Series A round about 6 weeks ago. Amini is led by a really remarkable Kenyan lady CEO. They're doing a lot of climate change work across the continent using satellite data. They were backed out of Seraphim in the UK. So Seraphim understand the space market, so that for them is not a risk. They understand. So it's like they were able to price the investment appropriately. There's a South African firm called Go Metro. They raised a $9 million series round about 2 months ago. They're a positioning company, so they do a lot of work around location-based services for public transport. And again, they were largely backed out of a combination of South African but international investors. So I think that there is a lot of work we need to do in increasing awareness and knowledge in Africa about the true risk profile of a space company. And we need to do a lot of education and awareness building outside of Africa, including in Japan, about the fact that investing and working in Africa is not actually as risky as
it's risky.
Think.
Yeah.
So we need to do a lot of that work, I think, before we're going to see a lot of venture capital coming into the space sector. I mean, this is part of the work that we're doing, is we're trying to change that conversation. And the easier that we can make it for startups to communicate what they're doing to venture capital, I think that's a great idea, and it's definitely something that we're gonna take on out of this call.
Right. This year we have the Nihonbashi Space Week, where they gather especially the space startups in Japan. But unfortunately, we don't see any African space startup booth or something there. And last year I was talking to the organizers called CrossU, and I told them that this year they should give us JASBN a platform to have a side event and invite some of these startups. And I think your RIIS plays a very significant role, because after reading what you guys are doing, you have the experience to support financially, mentor many startups. So I think coming to Nihonbashi Space Week to network with these Japan space startups and also the investors is a good one.
No, definitely. I think that there is a lot of respect for Japan, and a real recognition of what the Japanese have been able to achieve over the last several decades. And so I think that we and others would be extremely excited to do that, but we don't have those relationships as yet. And I think that this is, this conversation is part of
it's a very
that.
Great.
Definitely. That's definitely something that we can explore and help create more of these connections and contacts in through JASBN to Japan. So I think let's definitely talk more about how to do that.
Right. RIIS headquarters is in Kenya.
RIIS has grown up in South Africa. And we have a team of 30 odd people in South Africa, and if you look at the broader group, there's about 50 people of us.
Wow.
But as we kind of grew and have been doing more work across the continent, we realized that it was important for us to build an actual physical base outside of South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what my work is at the moment in Nairobi is building our first non-South African office.
Oh, okay.
So strictly speaking, our headquarters are in Johannesburg. But I'm setting up our Kenyan office. It's been really exciting for us as a firm to be able to grow and start opening up offices in other countries around Africa. It speaks to our dream of being a Pan-African firm. We're not quite Pan-African, but at least we are in two places. And we put a lot of effort in. We have staff from half a dozen countries across the continent. So this is the first step, and hopefully in a few years from now, we'll be able to have an office and a presence in West Africa as well. So give us
like
time.
If you want to come to Ghana, we have all the land resource for you. We can I can able to recommend All Nations University for you to set up your office and continue with activities.
I love Accra. I've traveled there many times.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So that'll be an easy sell for me.
Right. What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs or innovators who are interested in entering the space industry?
Most important advice that I can give for entrepreneurs is to build a sustainable business as soon as possible. One of the things that we've seen in other venture capital industries around the world is it is often easy to get venture capital funding even before you have customers. Right? So you raise capital before you have product market fit or traction or anything like that. And that is very difficult to do in Africa. Here, there is a lot of money, but that money will only flow once you have started demonstrating the first set of customers. So the most important thing I can suggest is if you are able to achieve, it doesn't matter how big they are, but if you're able to build some small level of traction in delivering value to customers that pay you for it, that will allow you to access capital, access relationships, access funds. And so I think that's an important difference between the African VC and startup environment compared to many other places is you have to have demonstrated some of that success first. And here, at least, it's a long game. It's a very long game to build businesses, but it is incredibly rewarding because the work that you are doing is not only impacting the lives of hundreds of millions of people, but it is also, personally and professionally and financially rewarding when you get it right. So
I agree.
It's great across all aspects.
Yeah, you said it all. I wish I can have the whole day with you, but we have limited time on Zoom. So thank you so much, David, for sharing your valuable insight and expertise with us today. And I look forward to working with you in the future. And let's keep in touch. So
absolutely.
Many great
conversations. Domo arigatou gozaimasu.
Oh, arigatou gozaimasu. All right, see ya. Okay. Bye.